welcome to OzCon, July 16, 2021. I'm joined by my good friend and wonderful Books of Oz store proprietor, Cindy Ragney. Hi, Cindy.
Hello, Colin. How you doing?
Great. It's nice to see you again, Cindy. I know we did this last year. It's really great to be doing this again this year. Just so you all know, Cindy and the Wonderful Books of Oz is the official sponsor of OzCon International, and I'll tell you a little bit about that sponsorship when we're during this video. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and the Wonderful Books of Oz?
Sure. Well, I've been selling books online for about 15 years, ever since I started upgrading my own Wizard of Oz collection from my childhood days. And I just thought it was so much fun, and I was enjoying learning about all the different editions of the Oz books, which I really didn't have a clue when I was a child. I was just reading them for fun and the adventure of it all. And so, yeah, I have my own website now, wonderfulbooksofoz.com. And I also sell other kinds of books and ephemera online. And I love W.W. Denslow in particular, the first illustrator of Oz. And I'm interested in original art of Oz and all kinds of other things related to Oz and books in general.
Yeah, I've even seen things you've got like ephemera, sort of MGM's Wizard of Oz, you've got bits of Return to Oz, so you've got a bit of everything really, haven't you, on your store when it comes to books and forms of things to collect.
I try not to just have the traditional books, but have some really interesting, unusual, and different things for collectors who may already have a good collection of the books themselves and want to branch out into other areas. And of course, some people are more into the books and some people are more into the movies. Some people are more into the later movies. So there's a whole different group of Oz collectors out there, many groups of Oz collectors. And I try to give a little bit to each of them to be able to find.
Yes, it's a great store. If you want to know a little bit more about Cindy and the Wonderful Books of Oz, there is a video that we filmed last year for OzCon when we did this virtually for the first time. I'm going to put that link down below in the description. You can also, specially for OzCon 2021, have a special discount code which gives you $10 off a $40 minimum order at thewonderfulbooksofoz.com. So get out there, get yourself a book. I've already had a book this year. I always make a thing of having an Oz book at OzCon, so I'll be using that code as well. So grab yourself a bargain. Alrighty, what we're going to talk about in this session is Cindy came up with a great idea about how to identify first editions of Oz books and first printings.
Sure. Well, I wanted to talk about this issue because there's a lot of confusion about what is a first edition of an Oz book. And it's a very complex topic, actually, and we won't get into all the details today, but I wanted to just sort of give a start with hopefully continuing videos as we go on later this year.
Right.
And the problem really resides in that the Oz books never put the actual publication dates. The publishers never put the actual publication dates on the books, except for the wonderful Wizard of Oz, the first edition published by Hill. But Riley and Britton and Riley and Lee didn't do this. They just put the copyright date on the books.
Yeah.
And that copyright date didn't change because that was the copyright date, not necessarily the printing date. And so everybody who gets one of these books thinks that it was published on the date that they find inside, which is the copyright date. And for most of the time, that's not true at all. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of listings, especially on eBay, for non-professional booksellers who don't have the right references, who are saying their books are first editions when in most cases they're really not. So we thought we would try to clarify that a little bit with these YouTube videos, since so many people are watching YouTube now, and kind of get the information out there.
So I guess that's where I've seen it as well. There's lots of Oz collectible forums out there, such as the Wizard of Oz Collectors United and the OzCon Trade Emporium. You often see Oz fans not knowing what to do with listings of Oz books. There's often books that look like first editions, but they're not. Is there a reference guide out there that we could use to figure this out?
There are indeed, and this is these are printed reference guides, which a lot of young people now, don't want to look at printed books, but in this case, it might be a good idea if you're going to be collecting Oz books. So the first, the Bomb Bugle, published by the Oz Club, has a lot of this information, but those are harder to find. And they basically compiled this information into this book, Bibliographia Oziana.
Mhm.
And this has gone through a couple different printings, and it's still available now from the International Wizard of Oz Club's site. And it's a very reasonably priced book. And this book goes into a fair amount of detail on all of the main, what's called the 40 main Oz books, written by L. Frank Baum, Ruth Plumley Thompson, and a few other authors. And it also includes pictures of the first editions and some of the later editions as well. So this is a really good book to get, and it still has current valuable information today. I think the latest printing is actually 1988, but it's still available today. And then there's a expanded edition, more or less, by Paul Bienvenu and Bob Schmidt, called The Book Collector's Guide to L. Frank Baum and Oz. And this is a wonderful book.
Yeah.
It goes into not only the Oz books, but also all of the other books that Baum wrote under his own name and pseudonyms as well. And it also provides a lot of interesting historical context for the books, and additional just fun information to read in general. And it's quite elaborate and has color images of almost all of these books as well. So that's wonderful. This book is out of print now. It's very hard to find. I'll just tell you that. If you ever see one at a reasonable price, you should snap it up.
Yeah, I have both books. They're both great.
The Bibliography is a great librarian-esque book. The Collector's Guide is a very colourful and detailed, and they're both great books to have. I love them both in different ways.
Right, and I use them a lot, as you can tell. And it's thumbed. It's got tears. I actually write in this book, which I don't write in any of my other books, but sometimes there's a few corrections or updates. I'll actually include those.
How would I start if I'm a new Oz collector? Let's say I don't know where to start. Would a good place be maybe start with The Wonderful Wizard of Oz? How do I know that it's a first edition and not one of the more recent printings such as Books of Wonder or one of the other facsimiles that are not clear on the printing date?
Yeah, so the first edition is called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. That's one thing. A lot of the later editions are just called The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
First edition should have a cover like this by W.W. Denslow, and it should have a cloth cover, and the publisher, which is a little hard to read here, but it says G.O.M. Hill on the spine.
Yeah.
And there was a couple different binding states, a couple different types of plates and all that. But basically, if your cover looks like this, and it's an original cloth version, and it has this title page, it should say G.O.M. Hill on the title page as well. Now, I believe there is one facsimile edition that also has Hill on the title page, which makes it extra confusing. But the book does not look old. It just doesn't look right if you know what you're looking at. And there aren't very many of those out there. And usually, like Books of Wonder, put Books of Wonder on the title page, which is what they should do if it's a facsimile edition. So this is the first edition of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. It's a great book. It's going to cost you money if you want to buy that book, but there's lots of nice later editions and printings as well. My copy isn't perfect. My copy's missing a couple plates and has been recased, and so I don't have a perfect copy either, but it's nice to have it. This is as Denslow and Baum intended. It's a very elaborate book. It has 24 color plates if complete, and it's got wonderful color illustrations throughout that Denslow designed to be really a different kind of picture book.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Hadn't been done up to this point in American children's book printing.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And later editions aren't quite the same, but still nice if you can't, the second or third, or all the early printings are still nice.
Ah, yeah, definitely. That's really beautiful. We moved on to a new printing house and illustrator, so I guess it should be easy to identify as those books.
Well, easier, probably less costly anyway.
Yeah.
And I should say that Hill actually went bankrupt, and 2 of his employees started the new company, Riley and Britton, that Baum then continued to publish with. And that was, he published the next 13 books with Riley and Britton, or Riley and Lee, which was what Riley and Britton morphed into. So The Marvelous Land of Oz, the first edition, looks like this. Wow. And it can also come in a green binding, but the cover looks like this with silver printing. You can see it was fairly elaborate as well.
Yeah.
And the spine says Riley and Britton Co. on it. And it even has art on the back cover, which is nice. And it has a number of color plates. I won't thumb through this one as well, because we'll go into all these books individually in individual videos later this year.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that Riley and Britton was the early publisher of a lot of these Oz books for Marvelous Land, for Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, for Osma of Oz.
Yeah, I've got Osma of Oz. It's a beautiful book, and it's my earliest book.
Yeah, really nice. And this, Marvelous Land on, the illustrator was now John R. Neal. It had a markedly different style, really colorful and interesting, and Dorothy looked entirely different. So there's a lot of things that you can get into once you start collecting these books that are really interesting, and you can start collecting the illustrators as well, and you can collect spin-offs, other books that the illustrators illustrated. John R. Neal, for example, did a lot of newspaper and magazine work as well. So some people just collect everything John R. Neal. So Riley and Britton then went on. We had The Road to Oz, Emerald City of Oz, Patchwork Girl of Oz, Tick-Tock of Oz, Scarecrow of Oz, Rinky Tink in Oz, and The Lost Princess in Oz, Tin Woodman in Oz. And those were all published by Riley and Britton, as you can see here. Lost Princess and Tin Woodman. And then we went to, instead of Riley and Britton, the publishing house changed their name to Riley and Lee. So The Magic of Oz that's shown on top there was actually published in the first edition by Riley and Lee.
So Riley and Britton's a bit of a giveaway then for those books, as more likely to be a first edition.
Exactly. So all those books that I mentioned up to Magic of Oz, if they do not have Riley and Britton on the spine and on the title page, then they're definitely not a first printing. They're later printings, even if they have color plates.
Yeah.
And then there were, some of these books had, some of the Riley and Britton books also had first editions and later printings that were still by Riley and Britton, but they changed small things that are called points for book collectors. So the points are things that you can find in the books that identify whether or not it is what printing it is, basically. And that's what your reference books will tell you, and that's why you need them, basically. But all the Riley and Britton editions of the Oz books are desirable, even if they might be a second printing, but it's still pretty desirable because even the second printings might only have been printed for a couple of years, and so they're hard to find.
Yeah, it's certainly in England, they're really, really hard to find. And even at the Oz conventions, when you do get a decent one, or even one that's a little bit better, they're not cheap, but that's because they're few and far between, and they're a little bit rare.
Indeed. Yeah, I usually pick them up even if they're not in perfect condition, because they are just so hard to find. And sometimes they're worth, getting restored as well.
Yeah, definitely. They also, I guess, after the Riley and Britton became Riley and Lee, there is a way in later publishings that you can start to tell when something might be a vintage book but not a first edition, because they started to change the printings later on. Eventually they gave up 12 color plates, didn't they, in the series?
Right. So from 1919 to 1934, those 15 or 16 books, I guess, those were all printed with 12 color plates. And then in 1935 also, as well. But 1936, which was Captain Salt.
Wishing Horse, I think, was the last one to have color plates.
Yeah, Wishing Horse in 1935, last one to have color plates. And then Captain Salt came out, and they basically just couldn't afford to make the books with the color plates as well anymore. And so from then on, the books didn't have
I think
color
we were
plates.
also getting into World War II, and there was a bit of a paper shortage. I think that also had an impact from what I've read about history for a lot of printing houses. But yeah, I guess
This even was before that, though. So I think they were just cost cutting, just weren't making as much money, and things were getting more expensive. So so if you have a Riley and Lee Oz book with 12 color plates, it probably was printed, 1935 or before. So it's an early printing, early edition, but not necessarily the first edition. And this is where it gets complicated, and you need the reference for each individual title is a little bit different in how the first edition is defined for that particular book. So I think we are going to talk specifically about a book that you have, Colin, and talk about why it's.
So here's what I had mailed earlier from Cindy. So this is the 1925 Lost King of Oz. I literally received this week. It's a beautiful edition, really lovely color paste cover on there. But how could I tell, Cindy, if this was a first edition? I hope it is, because that's what I bought from your website as a first edition.
Right. So in my list, it's a first edition, Colin, because you read my listing. And in my listing, I always specify why it's a first edition as well, rather than just saying.
Yeah, I trust you.
And so this particular one is interesting because there's a couple points for the first edition, first printing. In addition to having 12 color plates, and it must have the what they call the boldface spine imprint as well. So do you want to show that, Colin?
So this is the binding.
Yeah, so the spine imprint is down there at the bottom. And so Riley and Lee had a few different ones that they came out with. And this is called the boldface spine imprint because it's in boldface.
So this is the bottom bit here where it says Riley and Lee in that boldface kind of font. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. And in later printings of this book, they went to what they called the semi-script spine imprint, which is more of a kind of a slanted cursive kind of Riley and Lee. So that's good. So it's got the 12 color plates. It's got this the boldface spine imprint, but that's not the only thing that needs to have to be considered the first printing of the first edition, which is the most desirable. Okay. And the other thing is that the color plates must be coated or glossy on the printed side only. So this is getting really kind of esoteric, right? Because this is not something you necessarily notice.
Okay, so this, I guess, this picture I've got of Osma on the throne, it's kind of got a glossy white section around there, but on the back, it looks more like a standard yellow book page. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and when you feel it, it'll feel rougher.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like a high gloss finish on where the book plate is, and then I turn it there, and it's not quite the same feel as a normal page, but it's definitely rougher.
Right. And that's it. So that means that when they were printing The Lost King of Oz in 1925 and a couple years after, they had this particular type of plate that they purchased and had made. So the plates were put in separately from the actual pages, and so they're made of different kinds of paper. And this was the kind of paper that they used in the early printings of Lost King. And then small change, later printings, they started using plates that were coated on both sides. So probably their supplier just changed the paper, and then they started publishing those kind of or putting those plates in instead. And I actually have this is my copy of Lost King, and it actually is a slightly later printing from not much later. It's only, I think the references say 1927 to 1928, so just a couple years later. But it's not technically considered a first edition, first printing because of this, because it actually has these plates that are coated on both sides.
Ah.
So
You can even see by the color there as well.
Yeah, you can kind of tell. They're shiny and glossy on both sides. And looking through my copy, I found that 11 of the 12 plates were coated on both sides, and one was coated only on the one side. So apparently they used one from an early batch of plates that they still had some extras of, and then they used the rest of the plates were the second batch of plates.
Because externally, really, they look the same when you look at it from that point of view.
I think they do. There's also some comments about the color of the cloth can be different in the later printings, although I think mine's maybe a little brighter than yours.
Yeah.
So yeah, the references say the cloth color can be a deeper or a brighter blue cloth, but that's not something that you would really notice. You have to be pretty hardcore.
Yeah, I guess
noticing that level of detail.
I guess what we're trying to get at here is, if you're going to pay for a first edition and you're going to pay that extra money that a first edition commands, you need to make sure it's a first edition. So if you're going to go on eBay or places, you know, there are questions that you need to ask the seller to help establish if it's a first or maybe another edition. Is that kind of what we're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, if the seller is honest, he will tell you what the book looks like, and you can figure out from there, even if, you know, he may just be honestly saying he thinks it's the first edition and he just doesn't know. But armed with your reference books, you should know enough to be able to ask the questions that need to get asked, and get additional pictures or whatever, so that you know what you're getting is what you want.
And I'll post some links down below of places where you can get the reference books. Even the out of print books will be on eBay. If Cindy's got some on the website, I'll post some of them down in the description below. But also, as Cindy mentioned earlier in this video, come the fall in September, Cindy is going to start doing a Wonderful Books of Oz series on how to identify first edition books, starting with The Wonderful Wizard and moving all the way through the Famous 40. So look out for that, because that's going to give you that little bit extra detail on each book. Is that right, Cindy?
Yeah, that's just to try to get the correct information more out into the community, out into the world, for the people who, you know, aren't going to buy a reference book, and just make it easier for people. I should also mention that there is a really good video already on YouTube on the International Wizard of Oz Club's site by one of the members, Michael Gessel, who's a longtime collector. Mm-hmm. And he actually has a video, I think we're going to link to it below, that introduces a lot of these same concepts we're talking about. And he shows a lot of the Riley and Britton first editions and some of the points for those as well. So that's a good intro video to watch as well.
Yeah, it's about 20-25 minutes. It's certainly worthwhile watching, and I'll pop the link down to that below and you can look at that at your leisure. Great stuff. So I really enjoyed this, Cindy, and I've learned something as well. So I always trust your information anyway, but actually if I was now looking out for a book, some of the earlier editions, an extra detail that I didn't know was how the color plates had a different backing to them on some of the early editions. I was aware of some of the fonts on the spines and the names, so that gives me an extra thing to look out for. So thank you for that. I'm sure other people will be really, really grateful.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, that's for that particular book. It's probably different for the next book, but yeah, you've got to know about those things. There are also small changes for Lost King. Some people even want some of the earliest copies of the first printing, and you can actually find on one page there's type damage that occurred within the actual print run. Mm-hmm. So you can identify copies that have perfect type are assumed to be earlier, before that damage happened, and some people actually are looking for that particular earliest copy. So it's really it's super complex, but really fun and interesting as well to get into all these little details.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how this progresses and how each, because there's still a lot that I don't fully understand about finding first. My bomb collection is mostly a Books of Wonder, which you can see behind me just there, and I'm gradually getting the early or first editions. So I've got a lot to learn. So this is going to teach me a lot as we progress through this. So ensure that you like and subscribe the Oz Connection, which is the official YouTube channel for OzCon International, which Wonderful Books of Oz is a sponsor for. Don't forget, you can use the coupon code OzCon 2021 for $10 off a $40 minimum order at wonderfulbooksofoz.com. I'm going to put all that information down below. But if you want to see these videos of Cindy's that are going to go into the first editions, by liking and subscribing, you're going to be the first to be notified when they come out in September. Thank you so much for joining us, Cindy.
Thanks, Colin. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
And I can't wait for people to get your hands on the books. The Lost King of Oz came so well packed. Bearing in mind, I'm in Staffordshire in the UK. Cindy's all the way over in California, and it's arrived in amazing condition. So thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of OzCon, and I'll see you again soon, Cindy. Bye.
Bye.